Ino was the only daughter of a wealthy and well-respected family in the village of Obodo. She had been raised with love and care, given the best of everything, and her parents had great plans for her future. Among those plans was an arranged marriage to the son of a close family friend, a man from a similar social standing. But unknown to her parents, Ino had already given her heart to someone else, a man named Umo. Unlike the suitors her parents envisioned for her, Umo was a simple repairman, barely making ends meet. Their first meeting had been a twist of fate. One day, while driving along a dusty village road, Ino's car got a flat tire. Stranded and unsure of what to do, she was relieved when Umo happened to pass by and offered to help. He quickly fixed the tire without asking for anything in return, and his selflessness intrigued her. Ino was used to men trying to impress her because of her status, but here was someone different, someone genuine. She found herself drawn to him, returning to his small workshop days later under the pretense of gratitude, but in truth, she just wanted to see him again. As time passed, their relationship grew deeper. Ino was captivated by Umo's honesty, hard work, and the way he spoke with wisdom despite his lack of formal education. She saw qualities in him that she valued far more than wealth, kindness, ambition, and a good heart. They spent time together in secret, building a love that neither of them had planned for, but Ino knew the hardest part was yet to come, telling her parents. When her father finally brought up the topic of marriage and introduced her to the man he had chosen for her, Ino took a deep breath and stood her ground. "Father, I have already found the man I want to marry," she said with quiet determination. Her father was taken aback. He'd never even suspected that she had been seeing someone. When he asked who the man was, Ino told him about Umo, speaking of his integrity and potential. But her father's reaction was swift and harsh. He shook his head in disappointment, making it clear that he would never approve of such a union. "After all the years we've spent raising you, giving you the best life, you choose to throw it all away for a poor repairman? Do you really think a man like him will remain humble once he gets a taste of wealth?" His words stung, but Ino refused to back down. Desperate for support, she turned to her mother, hoping for a more understanding ear. But to her dismay, her mother sided with her father, warning her that love alone was not enough. Ino realized that she was completely on her own in this fight, but she wasn't afraid of anything. She felt even more determined. Every great love story, she thought, had to face trials before reaching its happy ending. When she shared the news with Umo, he was hesitant. He worried about the consequences, about what it would mean for her to go against her family's wishes. But Ino reassured him, promising that she would choose him no matter what. She was willing to walk away from everything, her inheritance, her comfort, her privileged life, just to be with the man she loved. And so, against her family's will, she made her choice. With the little money she managed to take with her, she left behind the life she once knew and embraced an uncertain future, believing that love would be enough to see them through. Ino and Umo started their new life together with nothing but love and determination. Since her parents had cut her off completely, she had no choice but to rely on the little money she had managed to take with her before leaving. Knowing they needed a fresh start, she convinced Umo to move to a bigger city where they could build a better future. They settled in Ayote, a bustling city full of opportunities. Their first few months were tough. Umo took on multiple odd jobs, doing anything from repairing electronics to running errands, while Ino sent out job applications, hoping to find stable employment. After what felt like an endless wait, she finally secured a well-paying job, instantly becoming the main breadwinner. It was a role she embraced without hesitation, knowing that their journey was just beginning. She supported Umo as best as she could, encouraging him to dream bigger. With her first few paychecks, she started saving money, determined to help him open his own business. She knew his skills and work ethic would make him successful if he had the right opportunity. 9 months later, Ino had saved up enough to help Umo launch his own electronics store. When she handed him the money, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Eno, is this real?" he asked, overwhelmed by the sacrifice she had made for him. She simply smiled and told him that they were in this together. Umo wasted no time. He found a great location, bought inventory, and even hired a sales assistant to help manage the shop. Business took off faster than they had imagined. Within just 6 months, the store had tripled in profits, giving them a level of financial stability they had never known before. For the first time since they had left the village, it felt like all their struggles had been worth it. Life was finally moving in the right direction. Their happiness grew even more when Eno discovered she was pregnant. The news filled their home with excitement, and Umo promised to take even better care of her now that he had the means to do so. They had built this life together from the ground up, and it was finally paying off. But as her pregnancy progressed, things became more difficult. Eno, once full of energy and ambition, found herself constantly exhausted. The sickness was relentless. She could barely get out of bed most mornings, forcing her to take a leave of absence from work. But even after a month of rest, her condition didn't improve. She eventually had to resign, unable to balance work with her declining health. With no job and no strength, she became completely dependent on Umo, who now had to handle both his business and the responsibilities at home. At first, he did his best, but over time, the pressure began to wear on him. The man who had once been so grateful for Eno's sacrifices now started to feel burdened. He dreaded coming home to a wife who could barely function, a household that constantly needed his attention. To escape, he started staying out later, drinking more, looking for distractions. What started as the occasional drink at a bar turned into something else entirely. Umo had once vowed to put Eno above everything, but now he was slowly slipping away from the life they had built together. At first, Eno tried to ignore the changes in Umo. She told herself it was just stress, that he was working hard to provide for their growing family. But as the months passed, it became impossible to deny. He was coming home later and later, his once loving gaze now distant and uninterested. The man who used to cherish her, who once called her his greatest blessing, barely even spoke to her anymore. Eno blamed the pregnancy at first, believing she had simply been too sick to be a good wife. She convinced herself that once the baby was born, things would go back to normal. But deep down, an unsettling feeling grew inside her, a quiet fear that refused to be silenced. And then, one afternoon at the market, she overheard a conversation that shattered her last bit of denial. Two young women were gossiping nearby, laughing about a generous customer, an electronics store owner who had a reputation for spoiling the women he slept with. They mocked his wife, saying she was foolish for not realizing what was happening right under her nose. Eno's heart pounded as she listened, the details too familiar to ignore. But even then, she tried to convince herself that it wasn't Umo. It couldn't be. That night, she waited for him to come home, hoping, praying that she was wrong. But when he walked in past 9 o'clock, reeking of alcohol, her stomach twisted. She asked him where he had been, and though his excuse was simple, a late order at the shop, his face told a different story. Eno wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she pushed her doubts aside and let it go, telling herself she was just being paranoid. But as the weeks went by, the truth became harder to ignore. Umo was no longer just staying out late, he had completely checked out of their marriage. The final blow came when she decided to visit his store unannounced. The moment she walked in, she saw her Annie. Young, beautiful, and dressed in a way that left nothing to the imagination. Eno's instincts screamed at her, warning her that this woman was trouble. She confronted Umo later that night, expressing her discomfort, but he brushed it off as nothing. He barely even acknowledged her concerns, and that was when Eno knew she wasn't imagining things. Her husband had already slipped through her fingers, and Annie was the reason why. but Ina wasn't ready to give up. She had sacrificed too much, given up everything, to be with Umo. She wasn't going to let some woman take him away from her so easily. At first, she tried to fight for her marriage, tried to remind Umo of everything they had built together, but he no longer cared. He was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. He flaunted Annie around town without shame, and when Ino confronted Annie directly, begging her to leave him alone, the woman only laughed in her face. "It's my turn now," Annie said smugly. Umo didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Ino had given him everything, her love, her trust, her money, and in the end, it wasn't enough. She was nothing more than an afterthought to him now, and so she made a decision. If Umo wanted to betray her, if he wanted to throw away everything they had built, she would make sure he paid the price for it. One way or another, she was going to make them both suffer. Ino had always believed that love was something worth fighting for. She had walked away from a life of privilege, given up her family, and sacrificed everything just to be with Umo. But now, as she sat alone in the house they had built together, she realized that the man she had once loved no longer existed. The version of Umo who had held her close and vowed to cherish her was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. He no longer tried to hide his affair with Annie, and worse, he made it clear that Ino had no choice but to accept it. She had confronted him, begged him to remember their journey, to think about their daughter, but he was unmoved. Instead, he coldly told her that if she wanted to stay in the marriage, she had to accept things as they were. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was humiliation. Imo paraded Annie around town like a trophy, while I know the woman who had built his success was left to rot in silence. The pain was unbearable, but Ino wasn't ready to give up. She still clung to the hope that one day he would wake up and realize his mistake. But the longer she endured it, the more she realized that day would never come. Umo was too far gone. He no longer saw her as his wife, only as an inconvenience. He stayed out for days at a time, barely bothering to come home, and when he did, he treated her with nothing but indifference. The final straw came when she overheard Annie bragging to someone about how she had completely taken over. "His wife is nothing but a fool," she had said, laughing. She still thinks she has a place in his life, but she's just his babysitter at this point. Something inside Ino snapped that day. She had endured years of love, sacrifice, heartbreak, and betrayal, and for what? To be disrespected, discarded, and mocked? No, she refused to let Annie win so easily. She refused to let Umo get away with what he had done. If she couldn't have him, no one would. And just like that, her pain turned into something else, something dark, something dangerous. She had spent too long being the victim. Now it was time to take control. She started planning in silence, carefully watching their movements, studying their habits. It wasn't enough to expose them. She wanted them to suffer. One night, she reached out to a hotel worker at the place Umo and Annie frequently visited, offering a sum of money too good to refuse. The plan was simple. The next time they checked in, their drinks would be laced. And so when the night finally came, Ino sat in her home waiting. Hours later, the news spread like wildfire. Umo was dead. Annie had been arrested, accused of poisoning him. The irony made Ino almost laugh. Annie, the woman who had stolen her husband, was now paying for a crime she didn't commit. Ino had won. But as she sat there, staring at the walls of the empty house, she realized that victory didn't feel like she thought it would. Umo was gone. Annie was ruined. But the love she had once fought for had left her feeling nothing but emptiness. The moment the news of Umo's death spread, chaos followed. People whispered in shock, wondering how a man so full of life could have died so suddenly. The authorities wasted no time in finding their prime suspect, Annie. After all, she had been right there when it happened, and given the nature of their relationship, it was easy to assume she had poisoned him out of jealousy or greed. Annie pleaded her innocence, screaming that she had nothing to do with it, but no one believed her. The evidence was too strong. She had been with him when he collapsed, and the poisoned drink had been served in their private hotel room. The woman who had once mocked Eno, who had flaunted her affair without shame, now found herself in handcuffs, crying and begging for mercy. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that no one saw coming. Meanwhile, Eno watched from a distance, her heart heavy with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had orchestrated this outcome, but now that it had happened, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had also died. The man she had once loved, the man she had sacrificed everything for, was gone. And with him, so was the last piece of the life she had built. At Umo's funeral, Eno stood silently as people wept for the man she had once known, but she couldn't cry. She had already shed all her tears long ago, back when she realized she had lost him to another woman. This was just the final chapter of a story that had been over for years. As she watched Annie being dragged away to prison, a part of her felt like justice had been served. But another part of her wondered if she had gone too far. Had it really been worth it? She had won, yes, but at what cost? She had loved Umo with everything she had, and he had betrayed her in the worst way possible. But even in death, his betrayal still haunted her. She could still hear her father's words echoing in her mind. A man may be humble in poverty, but wealth will show you his true nature. He had been right all along, and Eno had been too blinded by love to see it. She had spent years fighting for a man who had never truly valued her. Now, as she stood among the mourners, she realized she was not mourning Umo. She was mourning the version of herself who had once believed in him. With Umo gone and Annie imprisoned, Eno knew she had to move on. There was nothing left for her in this town except painful memories. She had fought, she had lost, and she had avenged herself, but none of it brought her peace. The only thing left to do was leave it all behind. She packed her things, took her daughter, and returned to the only place she could call home, her parents' house. When she arrived, they were shocked to see her, but their love for her had never faded. Falling to her knees, she begged for their forgiveness, telling them everything that had happened. They listened, their eyes filled with both sadness and relief. She had suffered, but she had survived. And though she had lost the life she once thought she wanted, she still had a chance to start over. With the support of her family, Eno moved to a new town, determined to build a life for herself and her daughter, one that no longer depended on the love of a man who never truly deserved her. Eno had spent years believing she was building a love story, but in the end, it had turned into a tragedy. Umo, the man she had sacrificed everything for, had become the very person who destroyed her. His betrayal had crushed her, but she had found a way to make him pay. Yet, standing in the ruins of everything she once fought for, she wondered if she had truly won. Revenge had brought her justice, but it hadn't healed her heart. It hadn't erased the pain or the memories of the love she had lost. And now, as she held her daughter's small hand, she realized that this child was the only thing that had ever been truly hers, something that no betrayal could take away. She looked down at the innocent face staring up at her and made a silent vow. She would no longer live in the past. It was time to rebuild, not for the sake of proving anything to anyone, but because she deserved a life free from pain and bitterness. Returning to her parents had been a humbling experience. She had left as a rebellious daughter who believed in love above all else, and she had come back as a woman who had learned love's harshest lesson. Her father, despite his stern words from the past, embraced her. He had been right about Umo all along, but instead of saying, "I told you so," he simply held her and told her she was home. Ino was grateful for that. She took time to heal, to work, and to focus on raising her daughter. She was no longer the naive girl who thought love was enough to build a life she understood now that love without respect and loyalty meant nothing. She sold the business she had built with Umo and used the money to start fresh in a new town, one where she wasn't Umo's wife or the woman who had been betrayed. She was just, a mother, a survivor, and a woman determined to write a better story for herself. Ino's story is one that reflects a harsh reality many people face. Love can blind us, make us believe in fairy tales that don't exist. Sometimes we give our hearts to people who never truly deserved them, and by the time we realize it, we've already lost too much. But if Ino's journey teaches anything, it's that self-worth should never be sacrificed for love. A relationship built on one person giving everything while the other takes without appreciation is doomed to fail. No amount of sacrifice can make someone love you the way you deserve. And when betrayal comes, as it did for Eno, revenge may bring temporary satisfaction, but it will never undo the pain. True healing only comes from walking away, from choosing yourself over a love that has already died. For anyone who has ever given too much and received too little, Ino's story is a reminder: never let love turn you into a prisoner of your own sacrifices. Walk away before you lose yourself in the process.